Hey everyone, Carl here with Literate Lessons, and we're back with another deep dive. This week we're going to be looking at cores, just help get people ideas for team building in early Gen 9 VGC. And we're going to start with the Gholdengo Murkrow Double Dragon core that took over pretty much the entire Limitless VGC event this past weekend. Gholdengo and company seems like a very strong strategy to start, and I expect to see a lot more of this and maybe some variations on it as the format develops into the end of January. Before we get started on all that stuff, make sure to do all that fun YouTube stuff for us. Like, comment, subscribe, all that great stuff. It helps us out a ton. Also, if you're looking for more friendly best of threes, the Literate Lessons Dojo is now open. Just before our circuit is getting ready to start here in January, we opened up the dojo just so people can get their feet wet with this format without having a whole lot of competitive pressure. Signups are every week on Monday, and then you have Wednesday to Wednesday of that following week to play your best of three. So if that's something you're interested in, make sure to join the Discord link in the description down below. So when we talk about cores, most people think immediately of a fire, water, grass, or a fantasy core, which is fairy, dragon, steel. But this core is a little bit more nuanced than that. We do have steel and dragon, but we've lost the fairy of this fantasy, but we're also more of like this 4-mon core instead of the traditional 3-mon cores that people are used to building with. The big linchpin of this entire core is Gholdengo. Gholdengo is a very powerful Pokemon, new to Gen 9, evolves from Gimmighoul using the Gimmighoul coins system that you collect throughout Paldea. And the idea here is Gimmighoul hits like a truck. Base 133 special attack, really good defenses and HP. It's actually a decent speed tier for what it is. So overall, this thing is a fairly balanced Pokemon for the most part. The reason it's so strong, though, is it has a signature move called Make It Rain, where you deal spread 120 steel type base damage across both opponents, and it only lowers your special attack by 1 stage. For reference points, Hydreigon, which carries Draco Meteor most of the time, is a base 130 power, 90% accurate move that lowers your special attack by 2 stages. Gholdengo got a huge just boost to Make It Rain, being able to just hit everything on your opponent's side of the field. There's nothing that is immune to steel, so it's going to deal damage to everything outside of those that protect or wide guard, and there's not a whole lot your opponents can do about it. This is probably the main reason why you aren't seeing the traditional fairy core, like fantasy cores, fairy types on them, because Gholdengo can kind of just show up and blow them up. Or you have to waste your Terra on your Sylveon or your other fairy types, and your opponent, you as the Gholdengo player, can kind of adapt to that pretty well. Outside of that, you have very good coverage in Dazzling Gleam, Power Gem, and Shadow Ball. You're carrying choice specs, and your signature ability, Good as Gold, means that your opponent can't really interact with you. There's no way to Thunder Wave you. There's no way to put you to sleep. There's no way to really stop what you're doing with Gholdengo outside of trying to make it to where you live all of the Make It Rains so it does less damage. The upside of this team, though, is you carry Murkrow around with you. Probably one of the more uncommon, I would think, Tailwind setters that people aren't used to. Murkrow has access to Prankster Tailwind, which is essentially this format's Whimsicott. And on top of that, you have access to the move Haze. Haze is one of the only few moves that affect Gholdengo because it doesn't target Gholdengo. And so Haze means that you get to reset all the Make It Rain debuffs and just keep going at it over and over and over. And so this Murkrow Gholdengo lead creates a very powerful 1-2 punch that can be very hard for your opponents to deal with if they're not fully prepared for it. Beyond all that, Murkrow has access to a ton of other support moves, things like Quash, Taunt, Thunder Wave. You have access to Perish Song. You have access to Icy Wind and Nightshade as other damaging moves. Sometimes I've seen them carry Brave Bird just to deal really big damage on their way out the door. So Murkrow's kind of a mixed bag of moves and items, and you can kind of just play whatever you want, but I think that Tailwind and Haze are almost a must-have if you're playing it alongside Gholdengo. Moving on to probably the last common linchpin of this combo is Hydreigon. Hydreigon having that levitate ability means your Gholdengo doesn't have anything to fear when it comes to ground type attacks. Hydreigon also resists fire naturally, so you can pivot it in on that. Gholdengo doesn't ever really have to worry about fighting type moves into it since it is a ghost type, so unless you terrestrialize your Gholdengo into the steel type, usually you have this nice little pivoty chord of defensive Pokemon to avoid getting O-code, essentially. Beyond that, Hydreigon carries a lot of very powerful moves: Dark Pulse, Flash Cannon, Heat Wave, Draco Meteor. I have seen multiple different Terra types across multiple different teams, the common ones being Fire, Steel, and Poison. Poison is an interesting one because Poison means that you are resistant to Fairy and resistant to Fighting, which are some of the more common moves that you're going to be tanking as a Hydreigon, due to the fact that most dragons like Garchomp aren't carrying those big dragon type moves. And so a lot of what people are doing is like, oh, if you Terra Fire, I'm gonna just click Rock Slide. And so Terra Poison is kind of the next adaptation of this whole nice little VGC trilogy. And I expect Terra types to do this kind of ebb and flow and flux thing as formats develop, and we'll see a whole lot of different Terra types as a format goes on. The last piece of the puzzle is usually a physical dragon type, kind of that counteracts a lot of the special type attacks that you have on Gholdengo and Hydreigon. So you'll see things like Garchomp, Dragonite, and maybe even Baxcalibur. All of them have their own specific uses and niches that make them unique, so it really depends on what you really kind of want to round out the rest of your team with to make them work. I personally been playing a lot with Baxcalibur here lately, mainly due to the fact that I think it's just unique with its thermal exchange ability. You have access to Ice Shard, Glaive Rush, Swords Dance, Dragon Dance, all that fun stuff. But if you're looking to be a little bit more competitive, a little bit more spiky, Garchomp is probably the way to go. Garchomp plays well with Hydreigon and Murkrow, both being immune to Earthquake. Hydreigon can carry... Garchomp can Terra Ground for very powerful Earthquakes. You can Terra Fire if you're really worried about getting like Will-O-Wisp or Burnt. So there's a lot that these four here can do together to really pressure your opponent. The other option of physical dragons is Dragonite. Dragonite naturally being immune to Intimidate with Inner Focus means that you can play a different item outside of the standard clear amulet that we see on most of the physical dragon types. Assault Vest, you can play Choice Band. There's a lot of things that Dragonite can do that the other two don't get to do. That being said, Dragonite also usually goes Terra Normal for very high powered extreme speeds, because extreme speed being higher priority than most everything else, you're going to do a lot of damage. But beyond that, it's really up to preference when it comes to the physical dragon type. You can kind of just pick and plug whatever feels good at the time. Now that we've talked about how the core kind of functions, let's look at it in use a little bit here. This first team is the first place team from the Limitless VGC event from this past weekend. Fede Campo VGC took this to a first place victory. Congrats to them. This team is playing the Gholdengo Murkrow Hydreigon, and then we're playing Dragonite, which you saw as the physical dragon type in that core. This is very, very powerful. We're playing like Terra Fire Hydreigon, so we have coverage for that. But on top of that, we're also bringing Ceruledge and Gengar, both of which have a decent matchup into opposing Gholdengo, being able to hit it with like a Bitter Blade. You also have Terra Blast. You also are carrying Shadow Sneak, so if they don't Terra their Gholdengo, or if you get it really low, you can Shadow Sneak and usually pick it up. We also have Gengar here to just kind of be annoying. It's really interesting seeing the Terra types on these things, because you see like Terra Flying Gengar and you immediately just like get flashbacks to Gengar with Levitate. And it's really, really cool seeing that this is a thing that you can do again. The next team on our list here is playing Garchomp instead of Dragonite. We're playing that Terra Poison Hydreigon, which is really, really cool. You're carrying choice specs on that set with Snarl and Terra Blast to kind of just beat up grass types. As for your other two slots here, we're playing a Terra Grass Arcanine with Intimidate and a Terra Grass Breloom with Technician. Both can do some really cool things. This Arcanine's got Will-O-Wisp and Extreme Speed to really hit hard if it needs to. The Breloom has access to Bullet Seed and Mach Punch and Rock Tomb for speed control. So in case Tailwind isn't enough, you have a little bit extra control with the Rock Tomb. Here's another version of the Garchomp Hydreigon Gholdengo Murkrow core, but we also have a hidden Fire Water Grass core inside of this set. With the Rotom Wash and the Amoonguss here, the Hydreigon being Terra Fire with Heat Wave means that not only do you have the Murkrow Gholdengo Hydreigon core, you have Rotom Hydreigon Amoonguss with Garchomp or Murkrow or however you need it to be to have essentially a second way to play the game when Gholdengo isn't that good. It's really interesting seeing people do that with their Terra types, kind of just having these hidden cores that on paper you don't see until you actually get into game and notice it. The last team I want to talk about here is taking some of what we've talked about a little bit and maybe adapting a little bit too much. This team made day 2, but didn't quite make it through to the top 8. I believe this team finished probably top 16, if I remember correctly. But this one takes the Garchomp, Gholdengo, and Hydreigon and pairs it with Talonflame as your Tailwind setter. Talonflame has a different suite of tools, so it's not quite exactly Murkrow, but depending on what your team is doing, Talonflame might be better for your squad. In the case of this team, I think Talonflame is a must. You really want that Will-O-Wisp and that damage reduction while also having that Tailwind to help set up your Tatsugiri Dondozo combo. This Tatsugiri is carrying Choice Scarf, so if Dondozo goes down, Tatsugiri gets to come out and really just hit things with Muddy Water, Icy Wind, or Draco Meteor before it taking a hit of its own. If you're unaware of how the Dondozo Tatsugiri thing works, Tatsugiri's ability is Commander. It goes into Dondozo's mouth, which becomes untargetable, so essentially you're fighting a 2v1 with Dondozo being super duper boosted. This can create some very unique scenarios, especially if you have a very powerful core of like we have here to go alongside it. The Tatsugiri Dondozo combo also really likes having Tailwind access to kind of help you get set up to that point where you are eventually unkillable. The Hydreigon here notably is Terra Steel, and our Gholdengo is Terra Ghost. This creates some very interesting dynamics, maybe not as optimal as some of the other teams are, but we also have Terra Steel Dondozo if we really need something like that. My hope is through talking about how the core functions and showing you some examples that you can apply these things to your own team building, whether you want to play with Gholdengo and kind of want to experiment with it, or if you're looking at ways to maybe even just set up to beat this core later on down the line. A lot of what makes team building fun in this format is noticing the trends and trying to get ahead of them and get a leg up on top of them, and that's what we're going to try to do this season with the deep dives. Again, if you like what you see, make sure to do all that fun YouTube stuff for us, like, comment, subscribe, all of that great stuff. Make sure to come join the Discord so you can hang out with us and play in our LRL dojo that's in full swing right now. And outside of all that, we'll see you next week for a podcast and then maybe another deep dive. Bye, everyone.